Costa. She is one of our Reverb compensation experts. Very excited to have her here today. And then Amy Stewart from PayScale as well will be joining. And PayScale has done some great surveying of companies and people and has, some great data. I have some feedback. Yeah. Here we go. Okay, sorry, I heard some feedback. I think we're good now. Well, to get started, I guess, Kylie, I think we had a poll. We'd love to kind of see where everyone is first on kind of if your organization is planning some type of return to the office or not. So Kylie, if you want to pop that up, that'll help guide how we talk about things too.
Michaela, because we're both logged in, you might have to go to polls and then
I can do it, yeah.
Or okay, yeah. Because it says I'm logged in on 2 devices now, which is totally fine. If not, I'll just pop it in the chat and we can answer this in the chat.
It's good, it's working.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, okay. Looks like we've gotten several responses. Yeah, it looks like I think if I in poll it'll share, but it looks like, the most common is, yes, hybrid. So, 12 out of 20 respondents, about 60%. And then, the next most would be fully remote. Still some undecided and a few kind of fully in person. So yeah, I think we're hearing hybrid to be kind of the most common, the common way people are going back, which can also complicate how you think about compensation too. So I guess to start, the question I want, both you and both Amy and Sherry to kind of give some insight into, what are some benefits of kind of considering a remote work strategy to employees and employers with regards to kind of compensation and cost savings?
I'll go ahead and get started, and then Amy. So there's quite a few. I think a lot of us have lived through a lot of these, and you'll recognize them. But I did get some amazing data. Comp people, we love data, from Global Workplace Analytics, and I can share that with the group when we're done. But they list about 5 main things. One of them is increased productivity. So they actually did a survey of about 2,500 people that all worked remote, and they tracked how many interruptions and how many minutes a day they were getting interrupted at work and at home. Now, this can vary greatly, I'm sure, if you have kids at home or are trying to do online schooling or something. But they noticed that 78% or 78 minutes a day, people were getting interrupted in the office versus 43 minutes a day. So if you annualize that, that's about 9 days of gained productivity from remote work. So I thought that was really interesting. I felt that personally. I don't know if anybody else did, but I'm lucky and I don't have kids. There's also real estate costs. So a lot of companies are decreasing the amount of space for employees.
Sorry, just a second. I hear a lot of feedback. If I think if you are on and aren't muted, if you could mute yourself, that would be lovely.
Are we good? Okay. So annual office costs per employee is about $7,400. So, but reducing that by about 25%. And that's if you have hybrid employees that are sharing a workspace, you're able to decrease your footprint of real estate. You can reduce $1,860 per employee per year, which can add up depending on the size of your company. Absenteeism is also huge. So what they found is people working from home are less likely to call in. They can take a doctor's appointment and not call in for the whole day because their doctor is close to their home and they're able to go in, get that done. They're not exposed to sickness, not just COVID, but flus and colds and everything that might take them out of the office. They're not being exposed to that and spreading it around. They're also, if they have a cold, not bringing it into work, and they're able to still probably work from home. They might be a little miserable, but hey, you can do it from bed, right? And also happier employees, ones that are more engaged at home and feeling comfortable. They're less likely to say, you know what, I'm over it. I'm taking a sick day today, right? So they're also getting better sleep, eating better, and exercising more. So that helps even with the benefits cost. You can save, it says in this calculator, which I love, up to $1,200 per year per employee for these types of benefits for absenteeism alone. Turnover. Turnover is like near and dear to my heart. So remote work enhances not just attraction, but attention or retention, attention as well of employees. People want it. They're searching it out. They talk about, you know, if I don't have it where I am, I'm going to go find it elsewhere. So, turning over an employee, you can see a million data points on how much that costs, anywhere from 15% to 80% of their annual salary. I typically like to think somewhat conservatively, around 33% of their annual salary is what it would cost to turn over that employee. You've got to hire a new one. You've lost what they know. There's training. There's all of the onboarding. So you want to keep employees as much as possible. And remote work is very attractive right now. Business continuity is the last one I'll talk about. So companies that had remote workforces in place before the pandemic, they really didn't suffer productivity in the change. They already had policies in place. They had employees already doing it. They were able to transition to doing that full time at home a lot easier. Companies that did not have that struggled. You know, they had to set up, how do we get the employees set up at home? What do we provide them? How do we get them, comfortable and logged in? And their IT departments were very, very busy for a while. So business continuity is not just for the pandemic. That's for anything coming down the pike. And if you're ready for that, you won't suffer those productivity losses that you would if you didn't have a remote workforce in place. So those are my top ones. Amy, did you have any more?
You covered most of the big ones. You're very thorough in all of those responses. Just kind of going off top of my head a little bit. I think one of the things maybe that needs to be separated out in this question are what are the benefits of a remote work strategy, just like overall, versus the benefits in regards to compensation. Potentially with cost savings. And I think we're going to dig into that a bit more in subsequent questions. So I'm going to actually table the second part of that and just continue on with this conceptualization that we're talking about here when it comes to remote work in general. So this is in addition to the things that you mentioned, productivity, real estate costs, less absenteeism and happiness, but lower turnover and business continuity. I think there is also a diversity play that can be made here depending on how you are strategizing your remote work. There is a difference between allowing employees to work from home and having remote workers. So it depends on how you're approaching that, but there is the potential to source talent from locations that you normally don't, which could give you a wider diversity pool depending on where you are currently sourcing talent against what's all out there if you broaden your horizons. So I think that's probably the only one that I've heard talked about that you didn't mention. And going with that, like that diversity piece, I think that applies also to people with various degrees of ableism who can't commute to an office, but can be very productive employees if they're allowed to work from home. And the same with, mothers with children and other people to which there are obstacles to working in a working environment, but who can be very productive employees at home. So I'd like to see kind of the benefits to our society overall over time, but you covered most of them in terms of the cost saving things. Those are more just kind of general talent base that you can pull from.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. So now I want to dig in more on kind of compensation strategies, specifically with kind of how to determine, to encompass remote workers and hybrid workers. What advice, Sherry, I'll target you with this question. What advice do you have for employers or, HR professionals on this phone or on this call in determining their compensation strategy around kind of encompassing remote workers and a hybrid workforce?
Yeah, first of all, and most importantly, in my mind, is write it down. Actually have one, right? I see so many people talking about it, so many businesses that talk about, well, this is what we do here, but they don't have it written down. They haven't shared it with their employees. They're not clear. Employees aren't clear. That's a concerning place to be if people feel like it is being used indiscriminately or differentiatingly between employees. So write it down, work with your HR group, get that written down and stick to it. That to me is the first thing that needs to be done. And if you haven't done that, really get to work on it because it's so important. And there's so many questions to be asked. I think that's the reason why it hasn't been written down in so many businesses right now, because there's not great answers. There's not great answers of how exactly should we pay? How is everybody else paying? We're really in the middle of this like whirlwind. And it's hard to, put something down on paper, but if you have it down, at least you can tweak it and change it and be open with this is how we do it. And this is our document that we're living with and working towards building. So that's the most important thing.
Yeah, thank you. Amy, would you want to add anything to that?
I can a little bit. I would definitely agree with writing it down. At PayScale, we talk a lot about your compensation philosophy or your compensation strategy, which are not necessarily the same thing, but certainly dovetail into each other. And a lot of organizations start with, do we have a compensation philosophy? And I think you can't know your compensation philosophy unless you know your talent strategy. You may not know your talent strategy unless you know your business strategy. So really getting all those ducks in a row when it comes to, what are we trying to do as a business? Are we trying to expand? Are we trying to hit certain goals like diversity goals, equity goals? What are the things that are driving this change? And really get aligned on what those things are, what outcomes you expect by embarking on this journey, and document it and share it so that it becomes a living document that people can refer to when they start to get confused by all the options to help guide that boat towards the North Star.
Yeah, thank you. To kind of continue down that path, and then I did see a question pop in that I'll make sure to ask as well. What are kind of the top, compensation strategies you're seeing, Amy, with the clients and companies you all support or in your data that people are using to kind of incorporate remote work or hybrid work?
What a great question. So the reason I'm here today is because I authored a report for PayScale called our 2021 State of Remote Work Report, which you can find on our website. It's lush with data. And this question is definitely one of the questions that is being talked about right now, not just amongst HR and comp professionals, but in the news. There's been a lot of interest in what is a location-based strategy, and is it better than whatever it was you were doing before, which I think there's been some confusion around. But to break it down very simply, traditionally, I think a market pricing by location strategy has been the traditional approach, where you're starting with where is our office or where are we headquartered as a company, and then determining the market pricing and the median targets that you're going after based on data specific to that location. And now we are seeing more interest, not necessarily going to say it's a better approach, but we are seeing more interest and more exploration into a more location agnostic or based on a pay zone, national median, or some other type of benchmark with geo differentials applied. And this doesn't really change the end result. What it changes is the methodology. It gives you more flexibility to say, okay, instead of just benchmarking to this one location or to these groups of locations where we have offices, we can now start sourcing talent from anywhere and using geo differentials to determine what the difference in pay is based on whatever you're using as your benchmark. And I see in the comments just this question of regional data versus other types of data. And that gets into the more granular of, if you're using pay zones, what should those zones be? And we have not dug in that far with folks. I can tell you for the state remote work report that around 30% of companies are undecided about what they want to do. And the overarching takeaway beyond that is that traditional market pricing based on the employer's location is becoming less popular in favor for exploring other types of ways of doing things. But one of those ways is a mixed strategy. So you might find quite a few organizations doing both, depending on what types of talent they're talking about. If it's a manufacturing plant that is literally tied to the location, they might stick with that market pricing strategy by location. And then for occupations that can float around the country, state, or around the world, they might adopt the geodifferentials approach. So we're really seeing people experiment right now, and we'll run this question again for our compensation best practices survey, because it might be different in December than it was 2 months ago. And so we'll keep you updated on how that is evolving.
Yeah, thank you.
Just
Oh, yeah,
jump in
please
and
share.
add
Go ahead.
a little bit more. I love this. Oh, I love this so much. Like this. So this is why I think I'm in compensation, because I get so excited about this stuff. So when you're thinking about going to like a differential, if you're thinking about that, don't forget to really ask yourself a ton of questions. And I wrote some down because these are questions that I talk to clients about. So how are you going to determine the location? You talked a little bit about that, but that can get really sticky. And, a lot of people start asking a lot of really detailed questions that, location to one person in the company might mean something completely different. Will you face any unexpected pay implications if you all of a sudden are adding an employee, say in California? California has like a new FLSA minimum for exempt employees, for example. If you're not set up for that, or you don't know about that, and all of a sudden you realize, ooh, California has to pay all their exempt employees $60,000 a year, and I didn't know that, I have to hurry and scramble and do all these things. So, really do your research about that, minimum wages in different areas, things like that. And of course, that can go down to city level. Do you have data? Where are you getting it? How often is it going to be reviewed? Who's going to be reviewing it? You can't just make this change one time and then never look at it again. So you kind of have to dedicate some people or a person to doing that. And how much time is that going to take? And have you really talked about that in your company? Or are you ready for that? And who's going to be responsible for making the changes and then checking on them, communicating any changes to the next couple of years, re-implementing. So think about it in the future. Like if you make these changes now, these are something that you're going to have to review often and make changes to often, which, as you know, can turn into quite a bit of work, especially when it comes to communication around pay. That is a very sticky subject and you have to get it right. Also, will you be willing to reduce an employee's pay? This is one of the most interesting things that I have heard asked and talked about. And for the most part, people are saying no right now. They're saying 66%, I think, in this one survey I looked at said, no, we will not reduce employees' pay. But you have to look at that then through a lens of pay equity. So if you don't reduce employees' pay when they move to another area, but other people are paid as per that location, what does that mean? How is that, going to affect your company? Is it equitable? So there's just so many little rabbit holes that this can go down. So don't just think, oh, we're going to pay by location and think that that's going to be easy, because it is not. I'm not against it. I've definitely managed geo groups in different companies and it's doable, but ask yourself all the questions first.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. Yeah, I think my follow-up question was kind of what's the best way to decide what works for your organization? It sounds like maybe going through those questions. Any other, thoughts on that around how to decide what works best for your organization?
Well, you have to probably look at your size, your footprint, like how many states are you dealing with? How many states would you be willing to deal with? How many resources do you have to manage tracking things by location and making these offers by location, even on the recruiting side? That's going to complicate things a little bit. You know, do you have a compensation team? Are you participating in salary surveys now? You know, with data like that, you might need to participate in some salary surveys to really get down into the data. And that as a comp person, that is one of our biggest pieces of work every year. So you're going to have somebody dedicated to do that. So it really depends on how much like resources you're willing to throw at it to make it worth it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I had a question, and you kind of touched on this, Sherry, related to, you know, our employers, you know, changing pay if they decide to pay, you know, based on geography or applied geo differentials. It sounds like, you know, from your perspective and what you're seeing, people are a no, and it looks like Amy, yeah, you had shared some information in the chat, but do you want to talk any more about that, or, you know, what you found in your report?
Yes, happy to. So what I put in the chat, I'll just verbally speak for everyone. So we did ask this question: are you planning to lower pay for employees who move away to a location where the pay is comped lower? And 69% said they were not planning to do that for current employees, and 62% said they were not planning to do that for future employees. That's a majority, but it still leaves 30 something or, you know, percent of organizations considering it. But I think it's very up in the air right now. What we're hearing anecdotally from companies who are trying this is that the conversations are difficult. So I think mathematically and statistically, a geodifferentials pay program makes a lot of sense. And if employees move away to a new location, lowering their pay is equitable and fair. But I think the human psychology side of that conversation is a very different matter. So there's two things happening. There's your, you know, comp strategy, and then there's your HR policy. And those things may be a bit different depending on your needs. Sometimes if you have really valuable talent that wants to move and would incur a pay cut by doing so, if you're not willing to let that person leave the company, you might find other ways to get around that. It definitely does create a pay equity issue potentially down the road, but, you know, lots of things in comp create pay equity issues, and all of the same ways you deal with that now is probably how you would deal with that when it comes to changing your comp methodology and your strategy holistically across the organization. But yeah, you're going to have to get creative, I think, with how you fix those problems with folks who are moving to new locations, especially if they're moving to a location where the pay is dramatically impacted, and you're pretty committed to that particular strategy. But just a little bit, you might be able to find, like, I don't know, special skills that they have and start doing skills differentials to make up the difference. You might be able to bump them up to a new range with a new title. There's like other tricks that you could pull and try to make that work. But it definitely does create some bumps in the road for a lot of organizations. And we are hearing that folks who have tried it have gotten turnover as the result of doing that. So there's definitely a risk involved in saying, you know, because you're moving to a new place, we're going to pay you less. That just doesn't sit well with people, even if it's really reasonable and fair and honestly equitable. It still just doesn't feel good to employees. So again, the HR psychology and the compensation strategy may need to do a little bit of a dance to get to that around that question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so there's obviously, we talked about potential pay equity issues with not changing it and then applying that to future employees. Someone brought up a question kind of on how, if you aren't making those, how are you ensuring that there's, you know, stability in the local market, labor market? Any thoughts from either of you on that you would?
Can you ask the question again? Maybe you frame it in a different way. I'm not sure I'm understanding.
Yeah. There was the question around, you know, if, for example, you have someone in San Francisco and you have employees in San Francisco and you have somebody that moves to Nebraska, which is probably, you know, a very different market, and it skews the local market harshly. You know, any thoughts or concerns, or, you know, how the data may, I guess, shift as the reports.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly the example that I gave some of our folks here at PayScale, not our comp pros, some of our other leadership roles, you know, asking about these questions of how is the location-based strategy, like why are people opposed to this? Why doesn't Google just pay everyone Mountain View salaries regardless of where they live? And the answer, you know, does create a pay equity issue, because if you have a lot of talent moving across the country and then you run those pay equity reports, you're going to see gaps eventually, maybe not right away. And it does require a holistic approach, I think, to making sense of that. But I think there can be a scaled way of doing it. So instead of punishing somebody immediately when they move, you might have some kind of a, you know, 1, 3, 5 year strategy of reducing pay increases, of trying to promote those people that you want to keep, of finding ways to compensate folks for other differentials that might make up the difference. I think there's a lot of wiggle room around that, and I'm sure Sherry has some much better ideas than I do, since I don't actually work in comp, but I do talk a lot with our folks, and I get asked these kind of philosophical questions and have to come up with answers. Those are some of the things that I'm hearing people do in response to this. But, you know, it's like any other kind of pay equity problem. What do you do when there's a merger or acquisition and you get a bunch of people and they're not equitable? It's the same kind of challenge. It's just, you need to think about it holistically. You need to have some kind of a plan, and you'd be monitoring it. So minimally, I would say, make sure you're looking at those things, and make sure your strategy is well communicated, in particular the equity part, if you do have to have those hard conversations with folks who move, because pay communications and pay transparency is an area where a lot of organizations want to do better, but consistently year over year don't do much to change what they were doing in previous years. So this is a place that really, I think, makes a difference.
I agree with everything that you said. And I had this, I work in my backyard. And so occasionally you'll hear a train come by, but you just missed the biggest dog fight in my neighbor's yard. I'm so glad you were talking at the time. It was a good one, but it seems to be over. The other thing that I noticed is, you know, and it kind of is going on the other side of going to geographic differentials, but I was looking at some data where companies had been operating under differentials, and they're considering actually dropping that and going to a national matching strategy, which means that, you know, they're looking at probably getting their talent nationally, now that they can hire a lot more remote workers. That gives them a much bigger candidate pool, and it kind of simplifies the whole process. If you have a lot of remote candidates and a lot of remote opportunities, it simplifies a process where you could create a salary structure using national data, and not you know, applying any kind of geographic differential to that at all. A lot of companies are going that way instead, towards the geographic differential side. So they're actually looking at making it a little bit simpler. I think the first reaction is often the location reaction, because it's so new, you know, to a lot of companies. And it's like, well, we should obviously pay everybody where they are. And then the other option is, well, we should pay everybody where headquarters is. But what about, let's pay everybody on a national scale? It's kind of fair across the board, no matter where you are. Actually, totally depends on how big your company is and where you're hiring people from. But that's a really good strategy as well. So it doesn't have to become more complicated if your situation would apply to that national.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. You know, I heard several pros. What are the cons, you know, of that model?
Well, if you have a lot of employees that are currently paid in San Francisco or maybe in tech in Seattle, right? You know, so a national model, it could be simplified where you could apply geo-differentials just on top of a national model pretty simply. I've had a company talk about, like, well, we have a lot of rural locations, city locations and then just kind of general in the middle locations. So couldn't we just apply a 10% differential above or below? And in that situation, that worked. It was simple. It was easy to administer. It's not going to work for every company. Every company is different. But if you don't have to get really, really granular depending on your organization. So a national matching might work with a differential added instead of trying to get really, really granular data from different cities or states or regions.
Yeah, I would just add to that. One of the other potential cons or differences is it might depend on the occupation and how competitive that occupation is. So if you're talking about customer service reps or like traveling nurses, or there's all different kinds of industries, I think, on this call, but some of the less competitive or where the job is really kind of similar across different regions, a national strategy might work really nicely for those jobs. And then other types of talent, like the more specialized it is, the more kind of like Mecca centric it is, the less that might work. So if you're looking to hire, I don't know, copywriters or senior developers with specific programming languages that are more easily found in higher priced areas where there are boot camps and training, grounds and all of those things, that can potentially be an occupation where that strategy wouldn't work for. So it might be your industry, it might be the occupation, it might be your company size, but there could be different things that require you to think in a mixed way about how you do comp.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of different considerations. There's not, a great one size fits all for any. And there's all these questions you have to ask about your company, your talent, your philosophy and pay to help you make the decisions that work well for you. Great. Let's see. So I kind of want to switch now. I mean, it's not really a switch, but it's kind of thinking about total compensation, right? So we've talked a lot about salary and those types of things, but, Amy, are, in your report or in, other data that you've been able to kind of capture, what types of, benefits or financial support are you seeing organizations can consider to support remote work?
Such an interesting question. We did ask this question last year, but I think so much has changed since November of last year. I'm not sure how useful that data is anymore for grappling with the remote work question. We will ask that question again in our compensation best practices survey, which I have to create like in the next couple of weeks here. So that will be live for everyone to participate in around that November timeframe. But anecdotally, we're hearing that total rewards has, of course, always been important. But I think during the pandemic, there are different things that people are interested in. Remote work by itself used to be considered a benefit. It was like one of the things that you offer, remote work. And that's going to be, I think, much more of a non-differentiator for a lot of organizations in the future, because a lot of companies are open to that now, whereas they weren't before. We're seeing certainly people be more interested in their healthcare package, including mental health care and workplace flexibility, which can mean the ability to work from home when you need to. It can mean the ability to set your own hours. It can mean like going into the office certain days of the week. But those types of things create that employment culture that really makes the difference when it comes to attraction or retention. So what are the total things that people are wanting? We did ask in one of our surveys of like what types of benefits are most popular for people. And I'm gonna pull up that data right now to support remote work in 2021. And again, this is from an older survey. This is from our CPPR last year. So a lot has changed since then, but in that data, we saw that, 52% of organizations are providing things like monitors, computers, home office equipment. About 20% are providing some kind of a stipend for employees to buy their own kind of workplace setup. And it's like a one-time stipend to go buy all the stuff that you need to be situated, and you can't control what exactly they spend it on, but they got it to do whatever it is that they needed. I've not seen long-term care specifically but that is an interesting one. I think organizations are also just kind of investing in other things to support remote work. So cloud-based technology, collaboration software, licenses for things like Box or SharePoint, or other types of tools that allow people to work on projects when they are not in an office together. I think those companies have all done very well during the pandemic when it comes to the types of revenue and interest they're seeing those types of tools. So yeah, I mean, there's things like monthly stipends for internet connectivity and telecommunication. That was around 14%. So I'd actually be interested in hearing from this group. What are the things that you want to know? And I can put that in our CPPR survey, because again, I think it's changed since November of 2020 and even more since 2019. So yes, please send me your list of things, and I will create a question just for that, and you will get the answer in that kind of January, February timeframe.
Yeah, I totally can send you some. We just had a question kind of come through looking just for like benchmarking on what people, what total amount are people providing, or what, those types of things. So I'll definitely share some information, and anyone here on the call is welcome to throw that in the chat, or send it, to me, and I can consolidate it or send it to Amy as well. Sherry, did you want to add anything? Yeah, on that.
Yeah, so I had done some research on work from home stipends, and because we had a lot of questions on that. And typically in the technology industry, that's where I got the most clear data. And they, on average, are providing around $1,500 every 3 years for a work from home stipend for employees. And there's a few different ways that people are going about that. So they're just having employees buy and then expense the up to $1,500 worth of whatever they need to work from home. They're also paying it out on paychecks. That one seems to be a bit controversial because people are getting taxed on it. They don't like that. And there's also third-party platforms where you can say, hey, go shopping for your computer chair or your office furniture here, and here's some money to spend on this third-party platform. So there's a few different ways that people are managing their stipends. It's kind of a newer thing that more companies are looking into doing. So you're kind of, just like everything else, you're seeing a lot of things all across the board. But the stipend for tech is about $1,500 every 3 years.
Great. Thank you for that. So we've had a couple questions. I'm going to go ahead and try to get some of those in. I think we had one other maybe that we could ask, but I want to make sure to answer all the questions that have come in here. So I'll start with this one. It's kind of back to the national wage pricing. So the question was, when using national wage pricing, is that more of a broad banding strategy or bigger spread from min to max of range?
Well, it depends on whether you have like salary grades already set up and multiple jobs within those grades, and you want to apply a differential. So you might want a little broader band to that. But if you're a smaller company and you're doing, like just individual matches, it doesn't have to be a broad band. It's just saying this job is worth this nationally, and building your structure around that, your range around that. So whether it's 80, 120 or wider. But I at this point, I don't think that a lot of people are going to be like creating completely different structures for each different area until they figure out if it's going to work for them. That's a lot of work and a lot of administration. I would just look at a national structure, create a range around that, and then look at your employee population and look at pay equity and all the 700 other questions that we were talking about, and finding out where that fits best in that range.
Yeah, and I think the other questions kind of go to various benefits. So, one of them was, if there are no commuting costs, would you allow reimbursement for office supplies monthly for permanent remote workers, for example? Or have you seen that? Or what guidance would you share with that? Either one of you.
Well, you know, companies are doing it differently. I was reading kind of in depth about like those 3 different ways and the pros and cons about that. Some companies were, I don't know a better word to say, but more paternalistic about how they wanted their employees to spend that money. So they wanted to have a little bit more control, make sure that it went towards things that they were using for work or in their home office. And they would go more toward that third-party platform and say, here are items that we want you to buy so that you're set up at home. Other companies were like, here's $1,500. And you know what you need, and we believe you'll get what you need. So it just is so much about culture and the type of company that you're operating under, and how many employees, and also administration of all of that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a much better question for someone in HR to answer than me. So if I'm going to respond to that, and be more as an employee, if I was applying to a job, would this sway me one way or another? Would it retain me one way or another? And I think it's really what Sherry said. It's about the culture. So doing something and being consistent about it shows that the HR department is a people-oriented department that cares that things are fair and equitable, and that people are not being unnecessarily burdened by these changes. I think you could make the argument that you know, if you provide commuter benefits for those who have to go into the office, then remote workers wouldn't get those. So do they really deserve something else, or are they just benefiting from not having to commute? So it's like a kind of interesting valuation of how you decide how valuable something is based on time or money. I kind of like the idea of just providing like a flexible spending account or some kind of a stipend, and saying, you know, regardless of whether you're remote or you're commuting into the office, like, here is a little something that our company gives you to go spend on things that you may have that are considered expenses by you, and kind of let people choose how they want to allocate that. But that would require trusting your employees, or just not being as paternalistic as Sherry said, and you know, about trying to micromanage how that's done. So again, culture.
Yeah, great. If you have other questions, feel free to add them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and unmute. We have plenty more time for Q&A, about 10 or 15 minutes. So yeah, feel free to either, like I said, unmute and ask your question, or if you want to ask it in the chat, I can ask it as well. So, oh yeah, there was a question that got popped in. So this is for Amy. So the question is wondering if the question around what would sway someone has generational differences too. Would Gen Z feel different than other generations, for example? Or yeah, do you have any insight or data on that?
Again, just speaking as a philosophical person and not necessarily someone with expertise in this particular area, I would say, yeah, I think there probably are different generational expectations. And one of the ways you can feel that out is to do a survey or do a town hall or a focus group with different cohorts within your org, and see what would matter to them. I think a lot of companies sometimes are scared to ask those questions because they might start setting the expectation that people are going to get a lot of things that they don't currently have, or hear a lot of complaints. But I think it can be a really rich experience. And sometimes people feel better just by being heard about the things that they're doing. So yeah, I would ask.
One of the questions that I see addressed in almost every remote work survey that I've read is, and it's one of the first ones, is, have you surveyed your employees? And it's not as much as I expected. I think it was somewhere around 40% of companies. Yeah, and it was probably yours that I read. Actually, great document, by the way. I loved it. Yeah, so ask. I think that'd be a great thing to do, right? Yeah, and open up that conversation, because just poking around at the dark thinking that you know what would be helpful might not be the best way to go about that. it's all new to all of us. You know, that's the thing. That's what makes it so exciting and crazy is I don't think I've ever been in a comp situation that is so changeable and so unknown. You know, most everything you can kind of look out a couple of years and make a good guess on what's going to happen and, you know, be right most of the time. And this is just in flux and it's fascinating and there's so much creativity coming out of it. So don't be scared to be creative and don't be scared to ask questions of your employees and really get down to what does our company want and need? What do our employees want and need? That's how you're going to keep them because other companies are asking the questions and being very vocal about what they offer. That's why we're seeing a lot of movement out there right now. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, thank you. This one's, you know, really more specifically for Washington State related to the long-term care mandate that is going into effect in 2022. And I think this was added into the chat when we were talking about, you know, other benefits or financial support. I know it's so new. I don't know if y'all have any kind of insight on whether, you know, employers are providing that type of, you know, benefit or, you know, support as part of their kind of total package. Or if you don't, we also have Katie from PBS. If she's still here, she may be able to chime in and help with that question.
I would definitely like hand that over to Katie. Benefit side is not my cup of tea. So.
And I think Katie is still
Yep,
here.
I am here. Yep. So our office definitely handles the long-term care side of insurance, and I personally haven't been managing much of it, but our owner Jer has. And it's been an interesting situation. A lot of when it comes to employer-based long-term care coverage, there hasn't been very much available, especially for companies that have like less than 500 employees. So if you're a smaller employer, again, you know, under 500, it's almost impossible to find a group-based plan, especially employer-paid version of it. We did just recently learn, like early this week, that Allstate is offering a product to employers that basically they have to have 10 employees and or their spouses enroll in order to qualify, but it is a voluntary benefit. So the employee is actually responsible for the full cost of the coverage, but the employer just gives them access to it. So that at this point is all we've really seen. I know early on when we first started kind of communicating this out to our clients about the new tax and trying to go out and get your own personal private long-term care coverage so that you could file for the exemption, we did get a few screenshots from clients and employees of those clients with, you know, what Google was offering or what Microsoft was offering. And I feel like I even heard at some point that they had cut off the Washington employees' access to those products, similar to how we dealt with on the individual market where basically, I think August, the first week of August was kind of the very last carrier pulled out of Washington State because you had so many people applying for these long-term care policies just specifically to file for the exemption. Most of the insurance companies were concerned that once they had that proof of coverage, they had their proof of exemption, which all you need is this one piece of paper that you then give to each employer thereafter. You don't ever have to refile for the exemption. You don't have to prove that you have the active coverage moving forward as of now. So all the carriers were under the assumption that they're all just going to cancel. Everybody's going to get this exemption and now I don't need the coverage because I have my exemption. Now I'm good to go. So I'm just going to cancel. So they all exited Washington. And ironically, you have to have active coverage in place by October 31st. And all of the carriers are stating that as of November 1st, you'll be able to buy long-term care again. So there's a lot. There's also, we're starting to see that there's petitions going into the governor to modify the language where right now it's you have to opt out. Like everybody's automatically enrolled in the program and you have to opt out, but they're trying to have them change the language where it's an opt-in program. So everybody's automatically not involved, but if you want into it, you can. Whether that happens or not, who knows? I mean, it's all up in the air, but from an employer offering it as a benefit standpoint, I haven't seen, other than the supersized corporations, I haven't seen anything available from the employer paying for it, at least.
Thank you for letting me put you on the spot, Katie.
No problem.
I appreciate it. It's great to have you here. Yeah, are there any other questions from the audience that would be helpful, as you are kind of working on these things right now? I'll pause. Any questions? Oh yeah, we did get one. So how do you keep up with current comp bands and ranges, specifically for tech companies, whether national or regional or by location? What are the best places to find data or to get your data?
What a great question for pay scale. I'm interested in maybe pulling on question too, because I do think that there's a lot of options when it comes to salary data today. But, obviously from my bias perspective, a modern compensation software product is going to give you a lot of choices when it comes to data as to which of those choices make the most sense for your business. I think that's going to vary. I know PayScale has a reputation for its crowdsourced data because that was how the company was, gained market share and insight in the market. But, we also own Market Pay and now Pay Factors and now Curo. And we have relationships with a lot of the traditional survey partners or publishers too. So really, when it comes to your salary data, I think some kind of triangulation method is the way to go, where you're not relying on just one thing, but you're really kind of cross-referencing across a couple of things. And that might be traditional surveys, it might be industry surveys that you purchase and upload and manage. It might be using a HR reported or aggregated data. If you're part of Pay Factors or part of Market Pay, you have the option to use what we call company sourced or HR aggregated data, which is where all of the companies who use that software and opt into the program, their data is available to you. It's anonymized, but you're able to use it for one of those check marks against other types of salary data. And there's the crowdsourced data. So that's the employee perspective of where they are uploading what they make within the salary profile. And we have done numerous validation on that data and have found that it maps pretty closely to the BLS, to the OS. What is it? The other one that's the government run one. But we've done a lot of validation across that. So although it's not traditional, it does offer a nice pulse check. And that data is the most quickly updated. So you can see it changing much faster than it takes for survey data to roll in after 6 months, a year, or 2 years. Crowdsourced data, you can see it's changing month over month and quarter over quarter, which has been nice during COVID. And I will let someone who actually manages comp answer this question because I'm sure there's a different perspective.
No, I absolutely am a big fan of salary surveys if you can afford them. They're very, very spendy. So, you want to make sure you get the right one if you're going to participate. And, it's spendy from a time perspective as well. PayScale is great. We didn't even talk before this, but they have great data. And I will say that early in my career in comp, we were very distrustful of crowdsourced data. I think we've all been trained that way if you've ever been in comp. Over time, especially through this pandemic, I think the most interesting thing is salary survey data is so old right now. For example, we were waiting for a salary survey to come in. It's still not going to be in until Friday. That salary survey data will show us reportable data from last March, this 2021 March. But in this financial institution, all of these banks have changed their minimum hiring wages after that date. So salary survey data will not be showing that until next fall. So this more up-to-date, upgraded data that you can bounce off of, if you can do more than one, like you said, triangulate, fantastic. And I think it should be used, especially right now. Salary survey data is too old right now to really watch what's happening. Also, there's a lot more company that are posting ranges for their pay. That's another thing we could go on for hours about, I'm sure. That's an interesting thing to go look at if you have some time. Like, go look at that job, see if there's anything posted out there with pay range data on any of the job posting sites. And for example, Market Pay, and I believe Comp Tool, they have differential engines now. Market Pays is new, and I was playing around with that not too long ago. So if you're thinking about differentials, like they have this amazing differentials engine that they just built into Market Pay. Also, ERI, so Economic Research Institute, they have a geographic differential tool. It's an annual subscription. It's not very expensive compared to salary surveys. You can go in and say, I want to compare Tacoma, Washington to Boise, Idaho. What is the geographic differential between those two locations in this type of job? That is really, really helpful when you're looking at how do I pay somebody now that's working remotely, especially if it's just a one-off or an offer or a strange relocation situation. So I think something like ERI or those differential engines built into comp tools are going to become more and more prevalent.
Yeah, and I recently heard of one, another kind of crowdsourced data source called levels.fyi. Again, it's a crowdsource, you know, I haven't personally used it, but I did see it recently. And so, yeah, worth looking into potentially. But
I played around with that one today. It was new to me too, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think one more question, maybe, this has come up. So, you know, will posting ranges be more of a thing given that Colorado requires it for job postings, for, you know, if there is an employee based in Colorado?
Well, there were companies that were posting remote jobs and said, you know, this is available for anybody in the United States except Colorado. And that has now blown up, as you can imagine. So there's a lot of papers out there. You can Google them. A lot of like attorneys have weighed in on this. I believe personally that it will become more of a thing, especially because of the remote workforce and people saying like, please do not exclude Colorado from your job postings. So I believe it will be, but again, we're in the middle of this ever-changing thing. Google every day. You'll be amazed the articles that you can find and the attorney opinions, even DOL. Like I go out on Bureau of Labor Statistics or DOL, and they'll often have papers specifically addressing some of these things. So those are really good resources as well. A little dry reading, I'll give you that. But like, if you're curious, it might be okay. Now the sun has come directly in my face, excuse me.
No worries. I did miss one. And yeah, the question was, you know, if the company doesn't have enough staff to keep up with compensation, you know, are there firms available? Yes, there are, you know, many different firms available, including, you know, Reverb has a couple compensation experts. PayScale, you know, if you're working with them, they have implementation and, you know, experts as well. And there's, you know, several others that, you know, I could provide in the Seattle area too that help with compensation.
Yep. Yeah. PayScale offers services as a ad hoc like addition to the software. So you get the data software and the services all in one place, which can be really helpful if you're an organization that's undergoing a lot of change and have more that you can do with the sort of that staff that you currently have. I wanted to say something about the transparency for job ranges. We asked that question in CDPR 2, when do you share pay data or when do you share pay ranges with your candidates/employees? I have to pull this up because it's not part of the remote work specifically, but I want to say it was somewhere around 12% say they share it kind of early on in that process. I think it should be higher. I think candidates want it to be higher, but there are some challenges to achieving that. You know, we ask every year also what percentage of companies have salary structures or a salary or a compensation strategy, and it's not a majority. And that happens year over year. So I think part of what's inhibiting people from being able to put their pay ranges in the job posting is lacking that maturity on the back end. like they're not confident to be transparent about their way they pay because they are lacking in the resources to have that level of confidence in how they pay. Either they can't afford the right salaries or the right data to set their salaries, or they don't have enough people on staff to maintain it over time. And so it puts a lot of risk on them to make that publicly transparent. We talk a lot about the pay transparency spectrum at PayScale. And I think the really important thing is that you share pay data with the individual employee to some degree at some point. So although a lot of people really want to see that at the recruiting level, like in the job ad, or at the very least in that initial interview with a recruiter, I think there are still a lot of companies that aren't really going into it at all, other than knowing, you know, you were given this offer and the offer letter and what you see on the paycheck. They're not getting any kind of conversation from their manager or from HR, or from anyone at the company about why they're paid what they're paid, what the breakout is of the value of the benefits that they're offered, how their total comp compares to other organizations. And I think that's a huge miss for a lot of folks who are putting a lot of effort into those things and not reaping the retention that they hoped from it, because I don't think employees understand that stuff as well as folks might assume that they do. And so it makes a big difference, I think, to ramp up your pay communications. And that doesn't really cost anything. I mean, it can if you purchase services, and it does cost time and effort, but it's not like other types of expenses. So I think that you know, if you're lacking all of the other things, that is something that I think can make a difference. And if you're able to post those salary ranges with your jobs, I think you will see an increase in applications. But even just doing it at the recruiter phone call level would make a big difference. So kind of thinking through your policies on that.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I think it was also a pay scale report that I read yesterday. It was about pay equity, and it asked the question on, you know, how do employees feel like they're paid to market? And they asked a lot of employees, and no matter where they were, whether they were under, at, or over market, so many of them, the vast majority, assumed they were below market.
Yep.
So if your employees that are above market are assuming that they're below market now, you know, they're at a risk of turnover for you. And if there was some transparency and some conversations, those people, and I'm assuming the ones above market are the ones that are really performing and doing well and very valuable to you, those people's risk of flight is much smaller.
Yep.
So there's quite an interesting case to be made for some pay transparency for sure.
I wrote that report too, so I can give you the numbers.
That's great. That's good.
It's 51% of employees who are paid above or at market think they're paid below market. And if you look at the different strata, those numbers get scarier at different levels. And then when we ran whether or not pay transparency decreases intent to leave, and found that it does. So an organization that is qualified as a level 1 will see 183% higher intention to leave from their employees compared to an organization that has level 5 pay transparency. If you look at that the other way, those level 4s and level 5s in pay transparency see a 65% reduction in employees for intent to leave. So very strong metrics there that show the value of pay transparency. And this is just about perception. We looked at market penetration and found no impact on people leaving. It's really about the way people feel about how they're paid, and that how they feel is about the communications that they have with their manager, with the team, with the company. So I can't emphasize enough that pay transparency, pay communications can really make a big difference.
Yeah, they can almost make more of a difference. Like just the conversation can make more of a difference than that actual part of where they're paid in the range.
Yep.
It's fascinating. It was such a great report.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. I think we can wrap up now on the panel portion. we do have a book raffle and some networking time for anybody that wants to stay. But first, I just wanted to thank Amy and Sherry so much for everything you shared today. All the reports, all the data, and just, ideas that we could take back to, our organizations to think about how we set our philosophy and strategy. So thank you. It's so many great resources to check out.